In this video, I'm going to show you guys step by step how we can get floating black background product photos. It's really easy, but you do need to know a few little things, so stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux, and today we are doing some product photography. I'm going to show you guys how easy it is to get floating products on a black background. There's a few things that you need to consider, including your setup and your lighting, but it's all pretty easy once you know how. I'm going to be photographing a Rubik's Cube today. I think this is a pretty iconic product, and it's going to look really nice on a black background with these nice bright colors. So I'm going to get started setting up for a black background shoot. The most important piece of equipment that you're going to need to do a shoot like this is some sort of black shooting surface. So I've got here a piece of black Perspex plastic. It's a little bit shiny. Mine's quite scuffed up, so you probably want something a little bit well, less used than mine, but this is going to be perfect for our background. We need something nice, dark and black to absorb all of the light in the background and give us as close to a pure black background as we can get. We're going to do more with our settings as well, but this is a really good starting point and definitely something you should have in your arsenal if you're doing some product photography. I've placed my black background down on a flat surface. I'm just shooting on a table here, and then I've placed my camera all the way up here. So this is up on the top of the tripod, on the top of the table, looking down at that black surface. Now, depending on the size of your product, you're obviously going to need a different size backdrop, but this should be fine for our Rubik's Cube. The next thing that we need to think about is how to position this cube on the black background. Obviously, it's not going to be particularly interesting if we shoot from the top and the cube is down flat like this. It's just going to be one side of the cube. So I actually want to lift this up a little bit and turn it on its edge so that we can get three colors at once. And then we can obviously move that around and play with some of the movement of this thing as well. But I want to be able to raise it off this background. If it's sat down here, you can see that we're getting a little bit of a reflection on the black there, so we don't really want that. I want to place it on the top of this little pedestal, and you can see that I've got a little bit of blue tack on there, just so that that is going to hold my Rubik's Cube in position. Might be a little bit tricky to get it to stay, but once it does, you should have a nice suspended Rubik's Cube. Obviously you don't want it falling over, but spend a little bit more time positioning this thing so that it's hovering above the black background, between the background and the camera. To bring up the brightness of our subject and not the background, we need to be able to control our light and exactly where it's supposed to fall. We don't want any of that light spilling onto the background and creating reflections or bringing out some of those scratches that you saw on my backdrop. I want to leave as little light on that background as possible and put it all onto our subject. So to do that, we need some really highly controllable lighting. I've got that in the form of the Adaptalux Studio. It's got these flexible, bendy lighting arms, which when plugged into a control pod, illuminate, and we can place these wherever we need them to. We can also diffuse or not diffuse our lighting as we need to, and it's also got some beam angle control to narrow down exactly where the beam of light is going to go. So this is really highly controllable lighting, perfect for doing product photos like this in a small studio setup. So I'm going to place a few of these lighting arms down next to my Rubik's Cube and point them at the various colored edges and see if we can't light up the cube without lighting up the background. Here's what my lighting setup looks like with those three white lighting arms all diffused, pointing down at my Rubik's Cube. And you can see here what I mean about the reflections and scratches on this background. We really don't want any of these showing up on the background. However, it's going to be a little bit tricky to place these because, as you can see, the Rubik's Cube itself is also a little bit reflective. I don't particularly want the reflections of these lights in these colored squares, so I'm going to have to place my lights in such a way that there's a balance between them, reflecting on the background and reflecting on the Rubik's Cube. As you can see, looking from the top here, I've placed these pretty well. However, I don't want any of those reflections on the background to overlap with the Rubik's Cube. So I'm going to place these in such a way that those reflections are actually off center so that they're not going to bother the Rubik's Cube, and we'll be able to remove them easily in Photoshop later just by painting over pure black. So I think that this is pretty well placed for our lighting to balance out the reflections on both the Rubik's Cube and the background. Now the other thing that I've had to think about with this lighting setup is that each of these sides needs to be lit separately. There's no one direction that you can light this thing where it's going to hit all of the sides unless you were lighting maybe from directly above, but then obviously the camera is directly above, so that's no good. We need to have a light pointing at each of these colors to light it from its own direction. I've also moved the blocks around a little bit to give it a little bit of movement, and I think this is looking pretty good as a floating product shot. When you're setting up your lighting like this, especially with a reflective background and a reflective product, you're going to want to think about all of the other light sources in your room as well. I've got 2 video lights going at the moment, and all of that light is falling onto my Rubik's Cube, reflecting in different ways, and it's light that I just don't want. I don't want any excess light falling on that background if it doesn't have to. So I'm going to turn out all of my room lights and my studio lights to take my final shot. Let's talk about camera settings for just a moment. You want to be able to expose for your subject and not your background. The camera's auto exposure is going to try and calculate the entire image as a whole unless you've got center weighted metering or spot metering turned on. That will end up looking at just the center of your image and trying to expose for that. The best way to do all of this is, of course, to change to manual settings and choose each of your settings yourself. That's going to allow you to fine-tune and tweak things to be able to expose just for your subject. The other thing that you need to turn off is HDR. Some cameras have HDR modes built in, and that dynamic range will also try to elevate the brightness of the background, which is something that we deliberately don't want in a shot like this. We want to leave the background as underexposed as possible, but our camera doesn't know that, so it's going to try and make everything nice and bright. So turn off any HDR modes that your camera has, and I do recommend shooting on manual. The last thing that you might want to consider for your product shoot is focus stacking. Focus stacking is taking multiple images at different points of focus through your image. So for example, our Rubik's Cube, we could focus right on the very top, but then the back of the Rubik's Cube is going to be a little bit out of focus and blurry. If we chose to focus in the middle, we might get a little bit of blurriness on both the top and the sides. We want to eliminate that as much as possible. We want as much of our Rubik's Cube or our product in focus at once. We're going to do that using focus stacking. I can do that using my focusing rail just here. This piece of equipment just in the middle between the ball head of my tripod and the camera will allow my camera to move up and down a bit, very slowly. But I can also focus stack using the focusing wheel on my lens. Now this is a pretty manual way of doing it, but it will allow you to move your focus through your image, and you take images as you go. You do need to make sure to do this in sequence, and then the software will be able to meld all of those photos together to create a fully in focus shot. I'll link up in the top right hand corner to a full focus stacking tutorial if you want to know in more detail how to do that. For now, I'm going to go ahead and shoot my Rubik's Cube in a couple of different layouts and see if I can get some nice images. The very last step is some post-processing, and even with all of our efforts to make the background as dark as possible, there's still quite a lot of scratches and reflections visible there due to my background being reflective, which is not really ideal. But we have made the background dark enough that it's really easy to remove. I can simply paint over the reflections using pure black, or I can use the burn tool to darken the shadows down to pure black as well. The method that I actually prefer though is actually to just cut out the background altogether. Because we've got a nice clean black background, this is really easy. You can either do it manually using a lasso tool, or you can use the automated selection tools in Photoshop, and it should have no problem picking out the subject from the background. If you do choose to select the subject separately, you can then paste in a pure black background, and in fact I really like to add a few colourful gradients behind the subject layer so that it looks like the colours on the Rubik's Cube are actually glowing and extending a little bit out onto the background. I think that makes this kind of shot look really, really cool. I'm pretty happy with my shots of the Rubik's Cube today. It's not the most interesting product out there, but I hope your shoot goes really well and you get those black background floating product shots that look really, really great on sales websites, and especially if you've got a black themed website, these look really, really cool. I do recommend trying out a few different positions for your product so that they don't look all completely alike. We did shoot some really cool coins the other day that used this same technique, and we were able to put the coins on an angle and light from the back as well, just to give it a little bit of extra visual interest when you're looking at the different shots. Let me know down in the comments if you found this useful and if you've got any more questions. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.